Welcome to the Sleep Science channel. I'm glad you're here. Maybe there's a gentle restlessness still moving through your mind, even as the world around you has gone quiet. That soft hum of thought, the faint awareness of time passing, these are not signs of something wrong. They are just signs of a brain still doing what it's designed to do. Even in stillness, your brain keeps counting. Not always with numbers, but in subtler ways. It measures moments, it tracks patterns, it monitors the space between events. From heartbeats to thoughts to the length of silence between words, the brain notices. It counts in the background. And this quiet counting shapes how you feel the world, how long a minute feels, how far away tomorrow seems, how fast a memory arrives. But what happens when that counting slows or even stops? What shifts in your perception? What begins to fade and what begins to emerge? Tonight we'll explore the science of internal timekeeping and what unfolds when the brain releases its grip on the rhythms it once held so tightly. As we move deeper, we'll see how time perception, memory, and awareness are all intertwined, sometimes gently unraveling when the brain decides to stop keeping score. The brain is always counting, even when we don't notice it. It counts without numbers. It counts in rhythms, in gaps, in shifts of light and shadow, in the pattern of sounds and silences. When you walk down a hallway and sense how long it is, when you hear footsteps and can tell how far away they are, or when you wait for someone to speak and feel the space stretching between their words, that's your brain counting. Not by choice, but by nature. It's part of the machinery of attention, of orientation, of prediction. The brain is built to track time, not in hours and minutes, but in lived experience. It holds on to durations, it anticipates outcomes, and it weighs one moment against the next. This kind of counting is not like arithmetic. It's deeper than that. It happens even in the dark, even without clocks, even before we learn to tell time. It's how we know when a silence has gone on too long. It's how a piece of music becomes familiar. Not because we memorize the notes, but because we remember the spacing. We know what should come next, not because we've calculated it, but because the brain has internalized the structure. How long things tend to last, and when change is likely to come. But counting is also exhausting. Not dramatically, not like lifting heavy weights or running a marathon. It's subtle, quiet, ongoing. Most of the time it happens in the background, but it takes up space. It keeps the mind slightly alert, slightly braced for whatever might come next. Even when the body is still, this internal counting can keep us from fully resting. We check the time without meaning to. We wonder how long we've been lying here. We think back to the last time we looked at the clock. And so the counting continues. This is part of why time feels different when we can't sleep. Minutes feel longer, not because they've stretched, but because the brain is measuring them more closely. The normal distractions of the day, the motion, the noise, the forward momentum, are gone. All that's left is awareness. So the brain turns inward. It starts tracking. It measures the gap between one thought and the next. It paces itself against the beat of your heart. And with nothing else to latch on to, time slows down, not in reality, but in perception. But something else can happen too. If the brain is allowed to stop counting, if the structure it depends on gently dissolves, then something inside us shifts. A different kind of awareness appears, one that is less sharp, less defined. It's not blankness, it's not forgetfulness, it's spaciousness. the kind of state where things lose their edges, where beginnings and endings blur, and where the sense of what time is it becomes completely irrelevant. You've likely experienced this before, even if you didn't name it. Those moments in early sleep where you're not quite awake, but not quite gone. Or during a long, uninterrupted daydream where your mind floats and time seems to disappear. This is the brain stepping out of its role as timekeeper. It turns out that our ability to count time depends on the activity of several networks in the brain. One of them is called the default mode network, a system that becomes active when we're not focused on the outside world, when we're daydreaming, remembering, or imagining. Another is the salience network, which helps us decide what to pay attention to. And of course, there are areas like the cerebellum and the basal ganglia, which are deeply involved in rhythm and timing. These systems don't just keep time in the mechanical sense, they shape how we feel time. Whether something feels fast or slow, short or long, dense or empty. But when these networks quiet down, so does our sense of time. And this can happen naturally, especially in safe, low stimulation environments. Darkness helps. Repetition helps. A slow, steady voice helps. When the brain is no longer being asked to respond to novelty or make predictions about what's coming next, it starts to let go of the structures it normally uses to stay alert. The internal counting fades. Not all at once, but gradually. And as it does, the boundaries between moments start to dissolve. This is often the state that precedes deep rest. It's also a state where insights, memories, and unexpected connections can quietly emerge. Not because we're trying, but because the usual filters are relaxed. The brain is still active, but in a different mode. It's less interested in keeping time and more open to wandering, to drifting, to gently exploring the inner landscape without needing a map. Sleep researchers sometimes describe this transition in terms of brain waves. In wakefulness, especially when we're focused or alert, the brain produces fast waves, called beta waves. As we begin to relax, those waves slow down into alpha and then into theta. These slower waves are associated with that in-between space. Not quite asleep, not quite awake, just drifting. And eventually, as the brain enters the deepest stages of sleep, delta waves appear. Slow, high-amplitude patterns that signal a full departure from conscious awareness of time. But you don't need to know the terms to recognize the feeling. You've likely had moments where you were unsure how long you'd been lying down, or when you suddenly realized you had no idea what time it was and didn't really care. That's the brain moving into a state where counting has stopped being useful, where awareness is still present, but no longer tracking. There's something deeply peaceful about this shift. It doesn't have the excitement of a breakthrough or the satisfaction of a solved problem. It's quieter than that. It's the moment when nothing needs to be measured anymore. Not because everything is known, but because it no longer matters. And in that space, the brain can finally rest. Not just the body, not just the conscious mind, but the deep systems that are always trying to keep pace, to keep time, to keep track. When people meditate, they often experience a similar sensation. Time stretches or disappears entirely. A single minute can feel vast, or an hour can pass in what seems like seconds. This isn't just a trick of the mind. It's a shift in how the brain is allocating its attention. Instead of constantly refreshing the mental clock, checking, updating, noting, the brain settles into a state where time is no longer the focus. And when that happens, we're no longer bound by the usual pressure of how long or what's next. Some people notice this most in nature, on a quiet walk in the woods, or while staring at waves on the shore. Without schedules, without clocks, without notifications, the brain's need to count begins to fade. The pace of the environment becomes the pace of thought. The irregular rhythm of leaves moving in the wind, or the slow retreat of water along the sand, becomes a kind of gentle entrainment. Not a pattern to predict, but a presence to absorb. And in that state, the need to know how long something has lasted simply fades away. This shift in perception is not about losing awareness. It's about shifting into a different kind of awareness, one that is softer, wider, and less defined by markers. The brain doesn't go blank, it goes quiet. And in that quiet, something else becomes possible. Not just sleep, but rest. Not just the absence of doing, but the absence of needing to do. The brain stops counting, not because it has failed, but because it finally has permission to stop. There's also something protective about this. In moments of stress or overload, the brain often counts more, watching the clock, checking the calendar, measuring the gap between now and later. But in moments of safety, it does the opposite. It releases its grip. It lets the moment be what it is, without needing to define it. That's what many people describe as timelessness, and while it sounds poetic, it's actually very physical. It's the result of neural systems relaxing their hold on the structure of experience. Sometimes people describe this as feeling outside of time, but it's not really outside. It's more like being inside a moment that has stopped flowing, not frozen, just open, spacious, without urgency. And when you find yourself in that state, whether it lasts a few seconds or stretches longer, it often feels like something has shifted, even if you can't say what. The irony is that the more we try to hold on to that feeling, the more it slips away. Because the moment you start tracking it, it becomes measurable again. The brain picks up its counting. The internal timekeeper returns, and the soft edges become defined once more. That's not a failure. It's simply how the system works. Awareness moves in and out of structure. Attention tightens and then relaxes. That rhythm is part of being human. But knowing this can help, because you don't have to force the brain to stop counting. You don't even have to try. You simply notice when the structure fades and trust that it will. Sometimes the very act of trying to fall asleep keeps the counting going. The moment you ask, "How long have I been awake?" the clock appears in your mind. But if you allow yourself to drift without demanding anything, the need to measure slowly disappears. And what's left behind is a different kind of space, one that isn't filled with seconds or tasks or goals, just moments unfolding quietly, awareness without pressure, presence without urgency, a place where the brain, for once, doesn't have to keep score. And in that state, sleep can arrive, not as a command, but as a quiet permission. A natural next step, arising from a mind no longer trying to track its way there. The relationship between time and memory is one of the most curious and quiet dynamics within the mind. When the brain stops counting, memories also begin to change in texture. Without the structure of time, memories become less linear and more atmospheric. Instead of placing events in order, the brain begins to hold them as feelings, as impressions, as soft echoes of experience, rather than time-stamped facts. You may have noticed that some memories arrive all at once, without a clear beginning or end. They seem to unfold in a blur, not because they're incomplete, but because the brain is retrieving them without anchoring them to a specific timeline. This often happens when you are deeply relaxed or just on the edge of sleep. It's not a failure of memory, it's the brain letting go of time as a framework and allowing experience to be remembered by texture rather than sequence. When we sleep, the brain continues to work with memory, but not in the way we might expect. It doesn't replay the day in chronological order. Instead, it sifts, it reweaves, it strengthens certain connections and softens others. This process, sometimes called memory consolidation, doesn't rely on counting. It relies on patterns, associations, relevance, emotion. And all of this happens outside of our awareness, beyond our sense of time. You don't wake up remembering how many minutes your brain spent reviewing a conversation or integrating an idea. You simply feel slightly changed, calmer perhaps, or with a little more clarity. That's the outcome of a brain that has been free to explore memory without the pressure of sequence. Time itself is not something the brain senses directly. There are no time receptors in the body, no sensory organ dedicated to measuring seconds. Time is something we construct internally, using clues from movement, rhythm, light, and expectation. It is a mental framework that allows us to make sense of change. And because it's constructed, it can also be deconstructed. In certain mental states, such as deep rest, meditation, or the threshold of sleep, the scaffolding that holds time together can fade. You may feel like only a moment has passed, when in fact it's been much longer. Or you may feel the opposite, that time has stretched impossibly wide. These perceptions are not illusions. They're reflections of how attention, memory, and awareness are interacting in the moment. As the brain slows down, so does its drive to anchor every moment. It no longer insists on labeling before and after. It begins to treat each passing thought as its own event, not part of a timeline, but part of a larger, floating field of awareness. This state is not just passive, it's generative. The mind can become more creative, more open, when it isn't confined by linear time. That's why some ideas only appear when you're drifting off, or when you wake from a dream. The rules have loosened. The clock is gone. And something deeper is allowed to surface. Even language reflects our relationship with time. We say we're running out of time, or we spend time as if it's currency. These metaphors shape how we think about our day, our lives, our choices. But in deep rest, those metaphors fall away. There's nothing to run out of, nothing to spend, just presence. The brain is no longer planning, no longer scheduling, it is simply being. That shift may seem subtle, but it changes everything. A single moment of timeless presence can be more restorative than a long period of restless waiting. Our sense of time is also influenced by novelty. When something new happens, the brain pays closer attention. It starts counting again. How long did that last? When did it start? What came before it? Novelty reactivates the brain's timekeeping systems. But repetition, softness, and predictability allow those systems to quiet down. That's why certain sounds like rain or ocean waves or a low, steady voice can feel so calming. They give the brain permission to stop counting, to stop tracking change, to let go of prediction. And in that state, the internal sense of time fades into the background. This is also why so many people use routines to help them fall asleep. Familiar sequences of behavior, brushing teeth, dimming the lights, turning off the phone, signal to the brain that nothing unexpected is coming, that it can safely stop measuring. These cues don't just prepare the body, they prepare the mind. They gradually ease the brain out of its role as a vigilant timekeeper and into a quieter role, one of passive awareness, open space, and gentle release. And yet, even as the brain lets go of time, it doesn't shut down. It remains active, but in a different way. Brain imaging studies have shown that during non-REM sleep, some areas of the brain go completely silent, while others become more active. The areas that handle external awareness and time tracking tend to quiet down first. Meanwhile, areas involved in internal reflection and memory start to glow more brightly. This change in activity is part of the transition away from counting. The world outside fades, and the world within begins to take shape. Dreams are a natural outcome of this shift. In dreams, time is fluid. You may experience hours in a few seconds, or feel stuck in a single moment that seems to go on forever. There is no standard rhythm. Events happen out of order, characters appear and disappear, logic bends, and yet within the dream it often feels completely normal. That's because the brain in that moment is not measuring time in the usual way. It's exploring possibility, emotion, memory, and imagination, all outside the boundaries of time. Some people try to train themselves to become aware of time while dreaming, a practice known as lucid dreaming. But most dreams unfold without conscious control, precisely because the brain's tracking systems are at rest. And for many, that's part of the appeal. It's one of the few spaces where time doesn't matter, where the narrative can twist and shift without consequence. And sometimes, that suspension of structure allows the unconscious mind to speak more freely. Outside of sleep, we sometimes enter these timeless states during moments of flow. When we are deeply immersed in a task, writing, painting, walking, or even washing dishes, we may lose track of time entirely. Focused, but not rushed. Engaged, but not counting. The experience feels full, even if we later discover that very little actual time has passed. The brain in those moments has stepped outside of the clock. It is no longer slicing experience into measurable parts. It is simply participating. The same can happen in certain conversations. When you're talking to someone and the exchange feels effortless, you may lose awareness of the clock. There's no sense of needing to check the time. Words flow, pauses feel natural, and the rhythm of interaction replaces the need for measurement. These experiences are often remembered fondly, not just for their content, but for the feeling of being outside of time, together. For many people, music creates the same effect, especially slow, ambient, or repetitive music. It creates a container where time seems to stretch or fade, not because nothing is happening, but because the changes are subtle, smooth, and non-intrusive. The brain doesn't need to count. It's invited into a different kind of listening, one that doesn't anticipate a beat, but drifts within a soundscape. The same is true for slow narration. The voice itself becomes a kind of rhythm, not a metronome, but a current. And as you listen, your awareness of the passage of time gradually softens. This is why sleep audio and calming video content work best when they don't demand attention. They're not trying to hold you tightly. They're offering something gentle to notice and letting you drift in and out of it. Your attention is allowed to wander. You can miss parts, and nothing is lost. There is no plot to follow, no conclusion to reach, just presence, just unfolding. This is an environment where the brain can stop counting without consequence. And the result is often that sleep arrives, not because it was forced, but because the internal environment became quiet enough to allow it. The systems that track, measure, and predict are finally silent. And in that silence, the body and mind are free to do what they know how to do. Not on command, but in their own time. Sometimes people ask how long it should take to fall asleep. They want to know the average. They want to know if they're doing it right. But that question itself reactivates the brain's timekeeping. The moment you ask, how long has it been? You've already turned the counting back on. The better question might be, what would happen if I didn't measure this at all? What would it feel like to lie here without asking how long it's been or how long it will take? That's not an easy shift to make, but it's possible. And when it happens, something loosens inside. The expectation disappears, and with it, the pressure. Children often fall asleep this way, not by following steps, not by counting minutes. They simply drift. Their brains haven't yet been trained to monitor time in the same way adults do. They're more easily able to move into timelessness. Of course, their bodies are also more forgiving. But the mental pattern is different too. There's less internal tracking, less demand for structure, and in that space, sleep can come more easily. As adults, we can relearn some of that, not by forgetting how to count, but by letting go of the need to count in certain moments, by choosing environments, activities, and rhythms that don't demand measurement, by leaning into the experiences that naturally dissolve our awareness of time without needing to force them. That might be as simple as listening to a calm voice, or watching a slow, unchanging image, or sitting quietly with a soft light. In these spaces, the brain begins to feel safe enough to stop tracking. And in that safety, rest is more likely to arrive. Even though modern life is full of clocks, on walls, on phones, in our minds, we are not bound to them in every moment. The body has its own rhythms. The brain has its own pace. And when we let those rhythms take over, the need to count fades. What's left is a different experience of time, one that is not measured but felt, not structured but spacious. And in that space, the mind can finally settle. There's something very human about the urge to measure time. It gives us a sense of control, of certainty. We measure time so we can plan, organize, and predict. And yet, the deeper we look into the mind, the clearer it becomes that some of the most important processes, the ones tied to rest, creativity, memory, and peace, don't operate well under pressure. They don't unfold on a timer. They need space. And often, they only emerge when we stop trying to measure them at all. Sleep is one of those processes. You can't force it. You can't schedule it precisely. You can try, of course. You can set a bedtime, dim the lights, and lie still. But actual sleep, the point at which consciousness fades and the brain begins to enter its deeper rhythms, arrives in its own time. And often it comes most easily when we stop demanding it. When the brain is no longer checking the clock. When it's not counting how many hours are left until morning. When it forgets that it was even trying. This is why so many techniques for better sleep are not about action, but about subtraction. Removing light, removing noise, removing stimulation, and most importantly, removing the need to track time. Because once that tracking stops, the brain is free to shift into a different mode. A mode that favors rhythm over schedule, pattern over precision, and ease over effort. Think of the way breath works. You can count it if you want to, Many relaxation methods use counted breathing, 4 in, 7 hold, 8 out, and those can be helpful. But over time, as the body relaxes, you'll likely stop counting. The breath becomes slower, softer, less deliberate. It begins to follow its own rhythm, and that rhythm has no numbers attached to it. The breath is simply there, moving in and out like a tide. This is the state where deep rest becomes possible, where sleep can enter gently, unmeasured, and unforced. The same is true for thought. When you're solving a problem or working through a plan, your thoughts tend to come in a sequence. You follow one idea to the next. You reason your way forward. But when you're resting, that sequence loosens. Thoughts don't disappear, but they become less linear. They don't push, they wander. And as they drift, the brain stops trying to place them in order. It's not concerned with cause and effect. It's not interested in timing. It simply allows thoughts to rise and fall, like clouds, across a quiet sky. This isn't the same as zoning out or going blank. It's a different kind of attention, softer, broader, and less concerned with outcomes. You're not trying to get somewhere. You're just here, listening, noticing, being. And in that space, something in the nervous system begins to settle. Not because you made it settle, but because the usual demands have faded away. Even your sense of self begins to soften in these moments. When the brain stops counting, it also stops reinforcing the narrative of selfhood. The internal story that says, this is me, this is what I'm doing, this is what I need to remember. That story is often tied to time. We recall who we are by placing ourselves in the past and imagining ourselves in the future. But when time disappears, so does the urgency of that narrative. What's left is not confusion, but relief, a sense of being untethered, free, but still present, aware, but not bound. This is the paradox of sleep. It's a state the body deeply needs, yet one the mind cannot summon on command. It arrives in the absence of effort, and that absence is easiest to find when the internal structures of time, of pressure, of measurement begin to dissolve. In some traditions, this idea appears in different forms. Philosophers and poets have long described timelessness as a doorway to insight. Not because time itself is harmful, but because our constant awareness of it can narrow our experience. When we're always measuring, we rarely feel immersed. But when we let go of that need, the immersion comes naturally. We are not watching life pass by. We're inside it, not tracking it, but living it. The brain's timekeeping systems serve a purpose. They help us navigate, coordinate, and survive. But they're not always needed, especially not at night, especially not here. In this moment, as you listen, there is no schedule to keep, no deadline approaching, no task waiting for your attention, just this slow unfolding, just the quiet space between ideas. If your thoughts begin to wander, that's fine. If you forget what was said just a few moments ago, that's fine too. This is not a lecture. It's not a lesson. It's simply a place where your attention can rest, lightly, gently, without needing to grasp. You may hear a sentence and follow it, or you may drift away and return later. Either way, you're doing exactly what this moment is meant to allow. In that drifting, the brain begins to let go of its edges. It no longer defines the start and end of each moment. It stops asking what next and begins to settle into just this. And that is the essence of deep rest. Not the absence of thought, but the absence of tracking. Not silence, but softness. A softness that extends to time itself. Even now, Your internal sense of time may already be changing. Maybe you're not sure how long you've been listening. Maybe it doesn't matter. That's a sign the counting is fading, that the mind has begun to unhook itself from the clock it usually carries. And as that happens, the systems that keep us awake, the ones that check, compare, and calculate, quietly turn down. Somewhere beneath all of this, your body knows what to do. It knows how to enter sleep. It doesn't need a number to tell it when. It only needs space, safety, stillness, and the absence of pressure. When those things are present, the counting stops, and sleep becomes not a goal but a gentle side effect of rest. So much of modern life pulls us toward measurement. We count steps, we track minutes, we analyze sleep cycles, and all of that data can be useful. But in the moment of actually falling asleep, it becomes noise. It becomes a layer the mind must peel away. Because sleep doesn't need to be measured to be real. It doesn't need to be optimized to be deep. It only needs to be allowed. And what allows it more than anything is the release of structure. The permission to stop measuring, to stop checking, to stop trying. That's not something we're always taught, but it's something we can remember, especially in quiet places like this, places where nothing is expected of you, where even your attention can come and go freely, where the voice you're hearing doesn't require you to keep track of anything, not the topic, not the time, not even your thoughts. This kind of listening is rare. It's not goal-oriented, it's not urgent, it's simply present. And that presence, without pressure, creates the ideal space for the brain to release its grip, to stop being the organizer, to stop being the observer, to become instead the participant in its own unwinding. If you feel yourself drifting, that's welcome. If you feel yourself returning, that's welcome too. Nothing is being missed. Nothing is being required. The flow continues, whether you follow closely or not. That's the nature of this space. It's designed to hold you without holding on, to support awareness without demanding it. And in that support, the brain can ease itself out of its usual roles. It can unhook from the clock. It can set down the task of counting. And in doing so, it can rest. You may wonder why the brain counts at all, not just minutes or hours, but beats, intervals, pauses, and patterns. It does this because prediction is a form of safety. By knowing when something is likely to happen, the brain feels more prepared. Even in childhood, we see this instinct. A baby begins to anticipate the rhythm of a song, the return of a caregiver, or the beat of a lullaby. That gentle familiarity creates comfort. It helps the nervous system feel regulated. Over time, the brain becomes very good at detecting the invisible structures in our experience. How long things last, how often they repeat, how much time passes between them. We don't need to consciously track this for it to shape our perception. The brain is always counting in the background because it's always trying to predict. But not every moment needs a prediction. Not every experience requires a rhythm to follow. And that's where something else becomes possible. When the brain isn't trying to stay one step ahead, it can simply rest where it is. That doesn't mean zoning out, it means softening, being less prepared and more present, less calculating and more aware. That shift in orientation is what makes rest restorative. It allows the nervous system to reset, to pause its vigilance, and to reconnect with a slower rhythm, one that isn't imposed by clocks or calendars, but that arises naturally from within. This inner rhythm is always there, though often drowned out by the demands of daily life. You might notice it in the way your breath changes when you're safe, or in the gentle weight of your body when it finally lets go of tension. It's not something you control, it's something you return to. And the path back is often through stillness, through quiet environments, unhurried sounds, soft voices, and spaces where nothing needs to happen right away. That's the kind of environment we try to create here. Not to distract you, but to free you from the need to stay alert. When the input slows down, the brain doesn't have to respond so quickly. It stops scanning, it stops preparing, and gradually it stops counting. That's when the shift begins, not all at once, but in stages. The edges of thoughts begin to blur. The line between now and later fades. The sense of how long have I been here disappears. And what takes its place is something softer, a feeling of floating, or maybe just of being, without needing to explain or measure what that means. This space is not empty, it's full in a quiet way, full of awareness that isn't doing anything, full of sensation that doesn't need interpretation, the kind of fullness that exists only when the usual background noise has faded. It's what some people call presence, or stillness, or simply being. And in that state, the brain is no longer trying to count anything. Not breaths, not seconds, not ideas. It is simply there. Many people find it difficult to enter this state. Not because it's hard, but because it feels unfamiliar. We're so used to tracking everything. How long something takes, how much we've accomplished, how far we've come. Even rest is often treated as a task. We ask whether we've rested enough, whether we're doing it right. But true rest doesn't work that way. It doesn't answer to a clock. It doesn't care how long it's lasted. It only cares whether we've stopped trying to measure it. This may seem like a small shift, but it changes the entire experience. A few minutes of real rest, where time has no meaning, can feel deeper than hours spent trying to relax. That's because the quality of rest isn't determined by duration. It's determined by surrender. Not a dramatic letting go. Just a soft unhooking, a quiet decision to stop holding on so tightly, to stop checking, to stop counting. And the moment you stop counting, the brain begins to reorganize itself. Not toward effort, but toward ease. Neural patterns that were once focused on measurement begin to loosen. They stop reinforcing the sense of urgency. They stop building timelines, and in that space, the brain becomes more fluid. It begins to drift. Not randomly, but freely, the kind of drifting that brings insight, that restores energy, that prepares the mind to return with more clarity later on. Even the body follows suit. Heart rate slows. Muscles soften. Breathing deepens. These aren't signs of sleep yet, but they're signs of the body entering pre-sleep. The threshold where alertness fades, but awareness lingers. It's the moment just before sleep arrives, when everything is quieter but not yet gone. That moment often extends itself, when the brain is not being asked to track it. Time stretches, or maybe it dissolves. Either way, you stop caring how long it lasts, because the moment itself is enough. It's worth noting that time distortion is not limited to sleep. In high-stress situations, time can seem to slow down dramatically. This is not because time itself changes, but because the brain becomes hyper-focused. It starts tracking everything in finer detail. Attention sharpens. Memory increases resolution. You remember more per second, and so the moment feels longer. It's the brain trying to ensure survival, but in safe environments, the opposite can happen. The brain relaxes, tracking stops, time seems to vanish, and in that vanishing, peace appears. This contrast shows how tightly time and emotion are linked. When we feel anxious, time moves differently. when we feel safe, it disappears. Not objectively, but subjectively. And that subjective time is the one we live in most of the time. Clocks are external, but the experience of time is internal, and it's shaped entirely by the state of the nervous system. So here, in this quiet space, we focus not on the clock, but on the conditions that allow time to dissolve. A soft voice, a slow rhythm, nothing urgent, nothing required, just words flowing gently, just thoughts that don't need conclusions, just presence. And in that presence, something opens, a space you didn't know you needed, a space where time can let go of its grip. This space is not rare, it's always available. But it takes intention to enter it, not effort, just permission. The permission to not know how long you've been here, to not care what comes next, to listen without holding on, to rest without tracking your progress. That kind of rest is deep. It doesn't leave you wondering whether you did it right. It simply leaves you feeling more whole, more intact, as if something that had been pulled tight has finally relaxed. And the next time your brain tries to measure, that's okay. That's what it was designed to do. But you can also remind it gently that not everything needs to be counted, that not every moment must be captured, that some experiences are better when they're simply lived, without being pinned to a number. Even now, your mind might be wandering. You may be remembering something or thinking ahead or drifting between thoughts. All of that is welcome. This isn't a test. There's no right way to be here. You don't need to focus. You don't need to keep up. You don't need to stay on track. There is no track. Just a quiet voice, a slow current, a soft unfolding. You may forget what was said a moment ago. That's fine. You may forget where this started. That's fine too. It's not important to remember everything. What matters is the atmosphere, the tone, the rhythm, the feeling of being allowed to stop counting. That's the invitation. And your brain knows what to do with it. As we continue, there's nothing you need to do. No need to respond or decide or reflect. Just allow the voice to continue in the background. Let your awareness come and go. Let it wander. Let it float. Let it forget time altogether. The passage of time, as we normally understand it, is rarely something we feel directly. We notice time because of change. We register the difference between now and before. We sense when something is beginning or ending. But when change is minimal, or when change happens slowly and steadily, time becomes harder to feel. That's one of the reasons environments with low stimulation, like quiet rooms, dim light, gentle repetition, can feel timeless. Not because time has stopped, but because the cues the brain uses to mark it are no longer obvious. Your brain depends on contrast to measure time. The transition from silence to sound, from light to dark, from stillness to motion. These are the markers that help build a timeline in your mind. But if those contrasts fade, if the environment stays steady, the brain begins to float. It no longer knows what to measure. And instead of counting, it simply experiences. This is why sitting by a fire, or watching slow clouds, or listening to a steady hum can feel so calming. These experiences dissolve the brain's need for structure. They dissolve the clock inside your mind. Even thought itself begins to shift under these conditions. When you're no longer keeping track of anything, thoughts become softer, less like sentences and more like impressions. You might begin to think in images or in sensations. You might notice that your internal voice becomes slower, quieter, almost like a whisper. Or it may disappear altogether, and what replaces it is not silence, but something closer to open space. You're still conscious, but your awareness is no longer shaped by structure. In this kind of state, the brain doesn't seek to control, it allows. There is no urgency, no timeline, no arrival point. Awareness is fluid, attention floats, and in that floating, the nervous system shifts out of problem-solving mode and into what some researchers call the parasympathetic state, a mode of calm, repair, and rest. This doesn't happen because you try to make it happen. It happens because the conditions allow it. And one of the most powerful conditions for rest is the absence of counting. The modern world rarely offers this. We are surrounded by metrics, measurements, countdowns, and reminders. Even in leisure, we often track our time. How long we've walked, how many hours we've slept, how many episodes we've watched. This constant self-measurement keeps the brain in a mild state of alertness. It continues to anticipate, to monitor, to compare, and even if the content is relaxing, the structure remains. That's why intentional spaces, like this one, feel different. They aren't trying to entertain. They're not tracking your engagement. They're not asking anything of you. They simply unfold, without structure, without goal. And within that unfolding, the deeper systems of your mind begin to adjust. They realize nothing is being asked of them. They sense that it's safe to stop monitoring. And so they begin to shut off, layer by layer. First, the outer alertness, the scanning for sound, light, movement. Then the inner alertness, the checking of time, the mental organizing of thought, until all that remains is presence, not empty but full in a different way, full of what is here, not what is next. This presence is often where sleep begins, not at the end of a task, but in the middle of a moment that no longer feels measured. Your brain might still be active, but it's no longer keeping score. That shift is subtle. You might not even notice when it happens. You might simply realize hours later that you had drifted and you don't know when. That's not a failure of memory. That's evidence of success. The counting stopped, and in that absence, rest was able to take its place. You may have experienced this when watching something familiar, a movie you've seen before or a show with a gentle rhythm. You stop trying to follow, you know what's coming. Your brain no longer needs to stay engaged. And gradually, without warning, you feel your attention dissolve. The same happens with music you know well. The mind stops listening for what's next. It already knows, and that knowing frees it to drift. That is the moment when the brain stops measuring and begins to release. This kind of release isn't something you force, it's something you fall into. And sometimes it's easier to fall into when the environment mirrors that softness. A calm voice, a still image, a space that doesn't rush. These cues tell the brain, nothing is changing quickly, nothing needs your attention, you can let go. And once the brain believes that, it begins to behave differently. The counting slows, then stops, and you enter a state where time has no weight. This weightlessness of time is not always easy to find, but it's natural. It's not foreign to your brain. In fact, your brain returns to it every night during stages of sleep, especially during the deeper phases, when dreaming fades and the body fully lets go. Those periods are some of the most restorative, precisely because the brain has completely surrendered its role as timekeeper. No planning, no remembering, no waiting, just rest. Even the act of dreaming reflects this. Dreams rarely follow the rules of time. Scenes jump in, characters shift, hours pass in seconds, or seconds feel eternal. The brain, untethered from its usual responsibilities, begins to explore freely. And in doing so, it reveals a different kind of intelligence, one that isn't bound by structure, but still has its own form of logic. It's not random, it's just not measured. When you awaken from a dream like that, you may feel confused about how long you were asleep. Time feels strange, distant. That's not disorientation. That's evidence of the brain exiting a timeless state and re-entering one where structure matters again. And that transition, if it's gentle, can leave you feeling clearer, not foggier, because the time away from counting has allowed your brain to reset. So when you create space to experience that timelessness while still awake, perhaps by listening, perhaps by doing nothing, you're giving your brain a similar gift, a break from needing to organize, a pause from precision. And that break can be deeply nourishing, even if you don't fall asleep. It reminds your nervous system that not all awareness must be active. Not all attention must be focused. Some awareness can simply exist, quietly, in the background. That background is where the deepest rest lives. Not in sleep alone, but in the space that comes before it. The threshold, the border. The moment where tracking stops and drifting begins. Some people call it liminal space. Others call it the twilight zone of the mind. Whatever name you give it, it's the state where time loses its shape, where everything softens, where nothing is expected, and where very often sleep begins to emerge. And if sleep doesn't come right away, that's okay. The brain doesn't need to be asleep to benefit from timelessness. Simply stopping the internal clock, even for a short while, can bring deep calm. You don't need to measure it. You don't need to ask how long it's been. You don't need to keep track of where you are in the process. That part is done. The brain is no longer required to hold the structure. It's allowed, at least for now, to let the structure go. Let it stay gone. Let the mind float. Let the silence be unmeasured. There is no schedule here. No beginning, no end, just this unfolding. This rhythmless rhythm, this quiet space where counting is no longer necessary. If you've ever been deeply immersed in something, reading a book, working with your hands, watching the light shift across a wall, you may have slipped into a state where time no longer felt present. These moments often pass unnoticed until we come out of them. We look at the clock and realize an hour has gone by, or perhaps only a few minutes, though it felt like much more. This is the brain's natural response to certain types of focused engagement. But it also happens in stillness, in calm, in repetition. Not because the brain has stopped working, but because it has stopped dividing experience into units. It is no longer carving up the flow of awareness into chunks. It is simply participating. This change in perception has a quiet effect on everything else. You may find that your breath deepens without your awareness, that your shoulders loosen, that your thoughts become less pointed, not gone, just softer. The pressure of needing to hold them in place disappears. You are still thinking, but not tracking those thoughts like beads on a string. They're just passing, arriving and fading without being counted. In these moments, you may not even feel like you in the usual way. The sense of self that is tied to doing, to remembering, to preparing, fades. Not in a frightening way, but in a freeing one. You become the awareness itself, rather than the organizer of that awareness. The voice in your head quiets, or it becomes so gentle that it blends into the background. The internal narrator loses interest in the storyline, and begins simply to observe. Or not even that, just to exist. This is the pre-sleep state, but it's also something more. It's a reminder that consciousness doesn't always require structure, that attention can rest without collapsing, that rest itself is not an absence of activity, but a different kind of activity, one that doesn't keep time, one that doesn't need outcomes, one that simply is. And it's in this space that something remarkable can happen. The body begins to repair, the brain begins to sort, not because you've instructed it to, but because you've stopped interfering. The systems that keep you alert, the ones that scan, that predict, that respond, have been allowed to pause. And in their pause, the systems that restore begin to activate. This shift doesn't need to be directed, it just needs room. There's a subtle intelligence here, one that doesn't show up when you're thinking hard or trying to be efficient. It arrives when you stop trying, when the mind stops calculating, when the body stops bracing. This intelligence is the one that knows how to rest, how to let the day fade, how to let memories fall into place, how to allow sleep to approach on its own schedule. When the brain stops counting, it doesn't become empty, it becomes receptive. Ideas may come, images, forgotten fragments, emotional tones, not in a flood, but in a kind of wandering. These experiences aren't structured. They don't need to be, they simply pass through. And the more gently they are received, the more likely the brain is to stay in this quiet state. It is not reacting, it is not fixing, it is not performing. It is simply being, like a lake that reflects the sky without trying to hold it. You may notice that this state is fragile. It can be disrupted by noise, by sudden light, by intrusive thoughts. And when that happens, the counting resumes. The brain picks up where it left off, measuring, organizing, reacting. That's okay, that's its job. But the return to stillness is always possible. You don't need to undo anything. You simply stop asking, you stop pulling, you stop measuring. And slowly the mind returns. There's no countdown to sleep. No precise entry point. It's not like crossing a line. It's more like moving into deeper water. You don't always know when your feet left the bottom, but you feel the difference in the way you're held. The resistance fades. The support changes. The awareness shifts. And suddenly you're no longer thinking about sleep. You're inside it, and sometimes you wake from sleep and wonder if you slept at all. You remember the voice, the feeling of stillness, the awareness that didn't seem to leave. But time passed. The clock changed. The body rested. That in-between state, the one where awareness and unconsciousness overlap, is a real place. It's not a failure to fall asleep. It's a different version of rest. And sometimes it's enough. Because the truth is, sleep is not one state. It is many states. It flows, it cycles, it drifts. And your experience of it may not always match the definitions. You may be more aware than usual. You may remember more. You may not remember anything at all. But what matters is that the body and mind have had a chance to stop holding time, to stop tracking, to stop needing to do. This is not something that has to be earned. You don't need to prove your tiredness. You don't need to reach a threshold. You simply need to stop trying to manage the process. And that letting go, quiet, unforced, is what opens the door. Even now, you may be near that doorway. You may have already passed through it or be floating just beside it. There's no need to find it. It finds you when the conditions are right. And right now, those conditions are here. There is nothing pulling at your attention, nothing asking for a response. The voice continues, but it does not demand. The words arrive, but they do not instruct. The pace is even, the rhythm is soft, and the space between the words is just as important as the words themselves. That space, that pause, that silence between is where the brain begins to notice that nothing needs to be counted. There is no interval to hold, no change to anticipate. And in that noticing, the brain begins to let go. It's not the same as forgetting. It's more like loosening, a gentle unhooking from the mechanisms of time. The internal sense of structure becomes less relevant. The usual threads that hold thoughts together begin to fray, not in confusion, but in relief. You're no longer following a path. You're floating within it. And if you find yourself returning, briefly noticing the moment, the room, the sound, that's fine too. Awareness doesn't break the state. It's part of it. What matters is that you are not being asked to track anything, not even yourself. You can be here and then gone and then here again. No continuity is needed, no memory is required, every moment is whole on its own. This is why sleep and the states that lead to it feel so timeless. Because they are. Not in the literal sense, time still passes, but in the experiential sense. There is no internal ticking, no pressure to mark progress, no goal to reach, just being, just this. The longer you stay in that space, the less you care about how long it lasts. And that is the shift. That is the turning point where the brain, at last, gives itself permission to stop. And once it stops, everything else begins to settle. There's a curious calm that comes when time fades. Not just from the outside, but from within. When you're no longer comparing now to before or anticipating what's next. The sense of moment to moment fades, and what remains is presence. Not as an idea, but as a felt reality. A space where nothing is asked of you, not even awareness. And strangely, even without doing anything, the mind begins to soften. The systems that normally run in the background, the ones that evaluate, interpret, and organize, start to slow. They're not shutting down completely, but they're idling. They're waiting. But not for anything in particular, just for stillness to do its work. And the less you engage them, the more they pause. This is a reversal of most waking states, where the mind is always preparing, but here it isn't preparing. It's simply being. And that beingness, that quiet existence without structure, is deeply unfamiliar to many of us. We're used to organizing everything, even our rest. We categorize our sleep, our dreams, our time spent awake. But sometimes, the most restful experiences are the ones we don't remember clearly, the moments where we weren't tracking anything at all, just drifting, just floating. And later, when we return to alertness, something inside feels different, lighter, as though a weight we didn't realize we were carrying has been quietly set down. This weight is often the pressure to know what time it is. Not just the hour, but the metaphorical time, what stage we're in, how far we've come, what's left to do, the pressure to measure, to place, to label. And when that pressure is lifted, the brain is free to enter a different kind of state, one where it's not trying to make sense of things, one where it doesn't need to organize the experience, it can just experience. This is what makes sleep so unique. It's not a passive state. It's active in a very different way. During sleep, the brain is still processing, still integrating, still working, but it's doing so without the oversight of consciousness, without the structures of time and sequence. And the lead up to that, this space you're in now, is where the transition happens. You may feel yourself going in and out of it. You might hear a phrase and then lose it. You might come back and not remember what was said. That's exactly what this space allows. There's no continuity required. No memory. Each word is enough on its own. Each breath, each moment, and the brain, gently noticing that nothing needs to be followed, begins to stop following. Even awareness becomes less focused. You don't need to attend. You don't need to respond. Your mind can wander or not. It can drift or stay nearby. It can float away and return at any point. There's no penalty for missing anything, no need to rewind, because there is no storyline, no structure, no path, just a quiet unfolding, a space that allows rest without requiring anything in return. And the more you're in this kind of space, the easier it becomes for the brain to drop its usual habits, the habits of comparison, of keeping pace, of tracking time. Those habits aren't bad. They help us survive, navigate, succeed, but they're not necessary here. And when the brain recognizes that, it doesn't resist. It simply pauses. And in that pause, you begin to settle, not just physically, but neurologically. That settling can feel like heaviness or like lightness. It can feel like warmth or spaciousness or distance. Everyone experiences it differently. But beneath all those variations is a common thread, the absence of demand. Nothing is being asked of you, not even to rest, just to be. And the longer you stay in that state, the more the brain learns to recognize it. It remembers that this is an option, that not every moment needs to be structured, that it's okay to exist in a space without measurement. This memory, if you want to call it that, becomes part of your nervous system's vocabulary, a place it can return to more easily next time, a familiar kind of silence. We rarely talk about silence as something active, but it is. It creates conditions, it opens doors, it reduces pressure, and in doing so, it makes room for things to happen naturally. Sleep, insight, healing, stillness. These are not results we can force, but they are outcomes that silence can welcome. Not by making them happen, but by getting out of their way. And that's what this is. A long, slow, steady getting out of the way. A removal of structure. A soft reversal of urgency. A space in which the mind can stop counting and still be completely whole. Even now, you may notice that you're not sure how long you've been here. That's a sign that the counting has already slowed, that the parts of your mind that usually track time are beginning to dim. Not shutting down, but stepping back. You may return to them later, but for now, they're not needed. And in their absence, there is clarity. Not the kind that solves problems, but the kind that lets problems dissolve. A clarity that says, there is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to hold, nothing you need to remember. Just this. And this too is enough. There's a depth to this kind of rest that doesn't depend on duration. It doesn't matter whether you've been lying here for 5 minutes or 50. That measurement loses meaning when the mind no longer holds time as its frame. Instead, experience begins to organize itself around sensation, around stillness, around a kind of subtle rhythm that isn't imposed but discovered. You don't push toward it, you fall into it. Or perhaps you simply allow it to rise. This rhythm can be hard to describe. It's not the ticking of a clock or the beat of a song. It's more like the slow unfolding of something that isn't trying to arrive anywhere. Like the way dusk turns into night, not with a moment, but with a series of gentle, almost invisible shifts. No part of it demands your attention. but if you notice it, it feels vast, like something familiar you had forgotten was always with you. That forgetting is part of the process. You forget what time it is. You forget what you were trying to figure out. You forget the shape of your day. And in that forgetting, the mind finds space. Not the kind of forgetting that leaves you confused, but the kind that frees you from needing to keep track. A forgetting that lets something else come forward, something slower, quieter, and far less concerned with doing things in order. Even the body begins to follow. You may notice fewer impulses to move. Muscles stop anticipating the next action. Breath slows. Not because you're controlling it, but because nothing is pulling it forward anymore. You're not preparing to speak or react or stand. The breath just is. A steady presence. Not asking anything, not being asked to change. Just part of the background. And your awareness of that background becomes more fluid. You may find that the edges of your thoughts are less defined, that memories, feelings, images all seem to arrive in a haze, not foggy, but soft, as if wrapped in something that muffles the usual sharpness. That's not a problem. It's the mind settling into an unstructured mode, a state where the usual signals the track beginnings and endings are no longer dominant. In this state, you may feel like you're observing everything from a slight distance. You're still here, but you're not inside every thought. You're beside them, watching, if watching is even the right word, more like sensing, existing within a gentle field of noticing. Nothing is being recorded, nothing is being filed. It's just being experienced as it comes. And then it fades. This is the pattern of rest. Something arrives, you notice it, it passes, and something else takes its place. But unlike during waking focus, you're not following the thread, you're not tracing connections, you're not telling a story, you're simply allowing the stream to flow without needing to step into it. Sometimes the stream is fast, sometimes it slows, sometimes it stops. None of that matters because you're not keeping time anymore. You're not checking the pace. The counting has ceased. The space between moments is opened. And there, in that space, the brain begins to do what it rarely does while awake. Nothing. Nothing in this case is not absence. It's presence without effort. The kind of state the nervous system craves but is rarely allowed to enter. The kind of state where healing, restoration, and integration can happen, not because you made them happen, but because you stopped preventing them. We often assume that healing requires action, that progress needs plans. But much of the brain's most important work happens in this quiet. Not in the middle of a task, but in the space after the task has ended. Not in the act of solving, but in the absence of needing to solve. That's where integration happens. That's where connections form, and they form best when the mind is not counting anything. You may feel a kind of slowness now, not heavy, but wide. Like time is spreading out, becoming less linear. That slowness is not tiredness, it's spaciousness. And within that space, the mind becomes free. Not because it has been released from something, but because it has stopped grasping. The effort to hold on to time, to track meaning, to sequence experience, all of that has fallen away. And what remains is just this. This state cannot be manufactured, but it can be invited. By removing noise, by softening rhythm, by letting go of narrative. That's why slow voices and still images work so well. They don't demand anything. They don't give the brain something to predict. They offer presence and allow the mind to decide how deeply it wants to engage, or whether to engage at all. That freedom is essential. The more the brain feels required to participate, the more it counts, the more it watches, the more it stays alert. But when it feels allowed to drift, to float, to release, it begins to choose stillness on its own. Because the default is not activity. The default is balance. And balance, when no longer disturbed by urgency, often looks like stillness. There's no need to mark when you enter that state. You won't know. It doesn't announce itself. There's no line, just a deepening, a widening, a softening of edges. And at some point, the awareness of time fades so completely that you could not say whether it's been a minute or an hour. That's when you know the counting has stopped. And the brain, in that absence, is doing what it knows how to do. Resting, drifting, rebuilding. It's a quiet kind of intelligence, this one. Not the intelligence that solves puzzles or builds systems, but the intelligence that restores equilibrium, that returns the mind to center, that rebalances without needing any instruction. It doesn't need time to do that. It just needs freedom from tracking. And so that's what this space is built for, to remove the need to track, to let words come and go without needing to remember them, to let time pass without asking how much, to let awareness float without pinning it down. That's not laziness. It's not forgetting. It's the brain entering a different mode of being, a mode where each moment is enough, a mode where nothing before matters and nothing after is waiting, a mode where you are not being counted on and you are not counting. You are simply here, and here is enough. As we move deeper into this timelessness, you might notice that the familiar mental signposts, names, dates, plans, worries, become quieter. They may still drift through, but they don't hold their usual weight. They arrive and fade without anchoring you in place. The mind, freed from its need to measure, begins to rearrange its priorities. Not toward action, but toward openness. Not toward remembering, but toward simply being. This openness allows for things you don't always expect. Sometimes long-forgotten fragments rise to the surface. A sentence someone once said, a face in a crowd, a smell from a childhood room. Not because you were trying to recall them, but because space was made for them to appear. The brain, without the structure of time, pressing against it becomes a different kind of space, less linear, more spacious, less concerned with logic, more attuned to connection. And those connections can form in unusual ways. You might find your thoughts moving across topics that don't seem related. But in this state, the mind isn't searching for answers. It's simply wandering. And that wandering is meaningful in its own quiet way, like a stream that flows without needing a destination. It carves space into the moment, leaving small patterns behind. Sometimes insight arises here, softly and without effort. Not a breakthrough, not a solution, just a feeling of understanding, or then like something long held has finally loosened. Even the body senses this shift. It often responds by sinking more deeply into the surface beneath it. The tension around the eyes may soften. The muscles of the jaw, the shoulders, the back, gradually letting go of the small holds they maintain throughout the day. These aren't dramatic changes. They're slow, sometimes unnoticed, but they mark the movement from guarded awareness to full safety. And safety, not exhaustion, is what sleep ultimately responds to. The brain doesn't fall asleep because the day was long. It falls asleep because it finally feels allowed to stop monitoring. And that feeling can't be rushed. It must be discovered gently, like wading into still water, sensing the moment your feet lift from the bottom. There is no right way to enter this. Some people slip into it quickly. Others move in and out, staying close to awareness, even as their bodies begin to rest. It doesn't matter how it happens. It only matters that nothing is being demanded. The voice continues not to hold your attention, but to keep you company. A soft sound in the background, like wind through leaves. Something the mind doesn't need to follow, but can return to if it wants. And in that return, there is rhythm. Not the kind that marks time, but the kind that carries it, like the gentle rocking of a boat, like the breath of someone sleeping beside you. That slow, natural rhythm begins to shape your experience, not with instruction, but by presence. The brain feels it, responds to it, joins it, and with each passing moment, the inner pace becomes slower, more fluid, more diffused. You may wonder now and then where you are in this process, how long you've been here, how far there is to go. That's the counting mind returning just for a moment. And when it does, you don't need to push it away. Just notice it, let it speak, and then let it fade again. Because it will. That voice only stays active when it's fed with urgency. Without urgency, it has nothing to hold on to. And what's left when it fades is something far more stable. A kind of awareness that doesn't need to name things. A kind of rest that doesn't need to be declared. It just is. Like dusk, like tide, like the deepening silence in a house where everyone has finally gone to bed. And in this silence, the mind becomes more than relaxed. It becomes receptive. To what? It's not always clear. Maybe to sleep, maybe to memory, maybe to nothing at all. But that openness is a kind of welcome, an invitation that requires nothing in return. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, sleep answers. Not like a response, but like a presence that was waiting nearby. The final moments before sleep often go unnoticed. There's no marker, no transition, only the slow, drifting away from noticing. The voice may still be speaking. You may still be hearing it. But the self that was following it is now distant. Not absent, but no longer involved. That shift is invisible while it's happening. Only later do you realize it occurred. And that's the nature of this kind of rest. It doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It simply becomes part of the background, part of your rhythm, part of your return to balance. If you find yourself awake still, that's fine. There is no rush. The process is already happening. You are in it. You are not late or behind or doing it wrong. The brain has already started to let go, already stopped measuring, already begun to float. And that floating will carry you, not to a goal, but to a state. One where nothing is measured, one where nothing is required, just the slow unfolding of presence, moment by moment, breath by breath, awareness without edges, time without shape. You're not outside of time. You are simply beyond the need to track it. And that, in itself, is rest. The farther you drift from structured time, the more the brain begins to feel its own natural rhythm, one that isn't imposed from the outside. It's not the clock on the wall or the ticking of a second hand. It's something quieter, something internal, a rhythm that doesn't mark time in seconds or minutes, but in softness, in sensation, in the gentle rise and fall of awareness itself. Even now, that rhythm is shaping your experience. Maybe it's in the way your attention slowly opens and closes, like the gentle breath of thought. Maybe it's in the weight of your body, how it shifts subtly with each passing moment. Maybe it's in the voice you're hearing, how its steady pace gives the brain something soft to lean on. This isn't measurement, it's resonance, the brain aligning itself with something that doesn't need to be counted. And as that alignment deepens, the old impulses fade. The need to check, to assess, to figure out where you are in the process, they lose their edge. They may appear briefly, but they don't stay. Because there's no task to complete, no success to reach, no end to anticipate. That's what makes this space different, is not a journey in the usual sense. There is no destination, only deepening. This deepening doesn't happen evenly. It moves like a tide, back and forth, in and out. Some moments feel like pure presence. Others bring you briefly back to thought, to awareness, to memory. But even those returns are softer now, less sharp, less intrusive. They come and go, and the rhythm of your mind remains steady, no longer shaped by urgency, just gently responding to what's here. And what's here is enough. This voice, this space, this unfolding moment that asks nothing of you, not your attention, not your understanding, not even your awareness. You can follow or not. You can listen or not. You can drift, forget, return. It's all part of the same rhythm, a rhythm that holds you even when you're no longer noticing it. This is why time feels so different in this state, because the usual ways we track it are no longer active. The brain is not measuring change. It's not logging memory. It's not mapping sequences. It's simply present. And presence, without structure, begins to feel infinite, not large, not endless, just without edges. There is no clear start or end to this moment. It simply is. And in that is, the nervous system begins to shift into its most restful mode. The heart slows, the breath deepens, muscles find their natural length, not because you told them to relax, but because nothing is holding them in tension anymore. The body remembers what it feels like to be unmeasured, and it responds with stillness. That stillness is not blank. It's full of quiet activity. The brain continues to regulate. The body continues to repair. Systems continue to coordinate. But they do so under different leadership now. Not from the part of the mind that counts, but from the part that listens, that responds to silence. That takes its cues, not from the outside world, but from within. And what it hears in this quiet is peace. Not peace as an idea or a feeling, but peace as an absence. The absence of pressure, the absence of demand, the absence of structure. Just presence unfolding in slow waves. If thoughts rise, let them. If memories appear, let them. Nothing interrupts this state. Nothing can break it, because there's nothing being held together. The moment doesn't require your attention to exist. It doesn't need you to remember it. It simply continues, whether you follow it or not. And the more you drift, the more this becomes apparent. You lose track of the thread, and that's not a loss. It's a sign that the thread was never needed. The brain is no longer building a path. It's resting in place, not stuck, settled, not held, supported by a rhythm that moves without counting, a rhythm that has always been there, just beneath the noise. This rhythm is the baseline of rest. You might notice it in the way your breathing and heartbeat begin to mirror each other, in the way sound begins to feel like touch, in the way thought begins to dissolve into sensation. These are not changes you make. They are changes that occur when nothing else is interfering, and they are among the clearest signs that the brain has left the structure of time behind. You don't have to stay aware of this to benefit from it. In fact, the benefits often deepen the less you try to hold on. Because holding on is a form of tracking, and tracking pulls the brain back towards structure. But letting go, truly letting go, allows the brain to release its grip entirely. And in that release, the systems that monitor time grow silent, not broken, not turned off, just quiet, resting, waiting. In a kind of still, watchful openness that doesn't need to act, doesn't need to count, just exists. And so do you. If there is a core to rest, it might be this: the absence of needing to know what time it is. Not just on a clock, but within your own experience. The feeling that you don't need to know how far along you are, how long something is taken, or how long remains. That quiet suspension of measurement creates the space where true restoration begins. It doesn't require any awareness of progress. In fact, it works best when you forget progress entirely. The brain has long associated time with action. To do something, we plan. To plan, we measure. To measure, we count. But here in this space, there is nothing to do. And so the foundation of action, time itself, begins to fade. The scaffolding drops. And with it, the internal structures that keep you alert begin to dissolve. You may feel this dissolution as stillness, or as subtle motion like floating or swaying. The sensation doesn't need to be defined. You don't need to ask what stage you're in or whether sleep is near. The question itself comes from a part of the mind that's already stepping back. Let it continue to step back. Let it recede until there's nothing left but the moment you're in, the space you're held in, the rhythm that no longer asks for your attention. Sometimes this state brings dreams. Sometimes it brings only blankness. Sometimes you remember drifting. Sometimes you don't. All of that is allowed. The mind does not have to perform. It doesn't need to deliver anything. There is no outcome required. There is only unfolding. And unfolding doesn't need to be measured. Even the voice, as you hear it now, may start to feel more like texture than language, like a soft presence moving through the room. The brain no longer parses every word. It doesn't need to. There is no meaning to hold on to, only tone, only cadence. And those two are fading into the background. This is where the quiet becomes expansive. Not empty, just unpressured. A space where the nervous system is no longer preparing for anything, no longer organizing, no longer storing. It is simply releasing. Not a dramatic letting go, but a gentle settling into the natural state it always returns to when time disappears. And when time disappears, so do most of the reasons to stay alert. You may feel your thoughts becoming more distant, as if they're happening in another room. You may feel sensation spreading out across your body, no longer confined to particular places. The lines between mind and body blur, and the identity that once managed everything steps aside. This isn't loss, it's release. The temporary loosening of the self that holds things together. The version of you that keeps track, that manages, that measures, has nothing to do now. So it fades, it rests, and the part of you that remains is the part that never needed time to begin with. The part that simply is. It can be hard to describe this state in language, because language often depends on sequence, this, then that, before and after. But here there is no sequence, only presence, not a progression of moments, but one ongoing moment that contains everything it needs. You may drift in and out of this state. That's natural. Awareness returns, thoughts resume. The brain gently tests whether it needs to come back online, and if nothing pulls it, it fades again. This cycling is part of the process. It's not a sign of failure, it's the rhythm of restoration. And every return to presence deepens the space that came before it. Eventually, sleep may arrive, or it may already have. You might notice it just before it takes over, or not at all. It might feel like falling, or floating, or nothing. That part isn't important, because the shift happens without needing to be recognized. The moment when the last structure falls away is often the one we forget. That forgetting is part of the gift. And if you don't fall asleep, you're still in the right place. You're still giving your brain something it rarely gets: time without tension, attention without pressure, awareness without tracking. This kind of rest has its own intelligence. It supports all the layers beneath the surface. It gives the systems that serve you all day a space to pause. And in that pause, they reset. It doesn't need to feel profound. It doesn't need to feel like anything. The absence of sensation, the absence of thought, the absence of time, that's not emptiness. That's space being given back to the parts of you that hold so much. You may notice now how few thoughts are left, or how little they matter. You may notice how the breath seems to carry itself, how the body seems to rest without needing to be told. These are all signs that the shift is continuing, that the structures are still dissolving, that the space you're in is working even without your participation. That's one of the strange comforts of this state. It doesn't require you to show up. You don't need to try. You don't need to notice. It continues whether or not you're aware. The voice may fade. The words may dissolve. But the current remains, carrying you gently, not towards something, just within something. And as it carries you, time continues to lose shape. Moments blur, memory loosens, the future stops leaning forward, the past stops tugging back. All that's left is this widening present, unmeasured, unclaimed, unbroken. A stillness that doesn't announce itself. A softness that holds everything. This is what happens when your brain stops counting. You've likely noticed by now that the sensation of listening has changed. It may no longer feel like you're hearing every sentence. The voice may seem further away or less specific. That too is part of the shift. Not a decline in attention, but a redirection. Your awareness is no longer tied to tracking meaning. It's simply present with sound. The content becomes less important than the continuity. A low, even current, flowing just beneath your thoughts, or perhaps where thoughts used to be. And the farther you drift, the more time seems to recede, not just as an idea, but as a structure. Things begin to float. You may forget where one thought ended and another began. You may not remember the start of this sentence by the time it finishes, and that's exactly the point. The brain has stopped holding on. It's not losing anything, it's releasing, making room, creating space. And in that space, rest deepens. You don't need to guide this process. In fact, the less you guide, the more easily it unfolds. The part of the mind that wants to help, to monitor, to check in, to assess, can rest now. Its work is done. Not because something has been achieved, but because there's nothing left to achieve. You're not preparing anymore. You're not organizing. You're simply here. And here is no longer a moment in time. It's not part of a sequence. It doesn't have a timestamp. It doesn't exist between a before and an after. It's just this spaciousness, this drifting, this quiet. And within that quiet, something ancient takes over, a rhythm that doesn't belong to memory or willpower. A rhythm that's deeper than thought. That rhythm carries you into a kind of inner distance. You may feel like you're further away from yourself or closer than ever, like the boundary between the inner and outer has thinned. Sounds, sensations, images may pass through you, not around you. The brain is no longer placing things into categories. It's not sorting, it's absorbing. Or not even that. It's simply coexisting with experience without trying to frame it. This state is deeply regenerative. Not because it fixes anything, but because it pauses the things that create tension. It steps out of the loop of doing, remembering, planning, measuring. And in that step outside, the brain gets to exist in its rawest, most unstructured state. Still alive, still active, but no longer pushing. Many people search for this state through meditation or breath work or long hours of solitude. And while those practices can help, the truth is that this space is always available. It doesn't need to be earned. It doesn't require discipline. It only requires the right conditions and the permission to let go. Letting go is not something you do. It's something you stop doing, you stop holding, you stop pressing, you stop tightening the grip on thought, time, identity, and when the grip is loosened, even slightly, this state begins to appear. Not like a doorway opening, more like a fog lifting or a stillness rising. You may already be far along that path. You may be aware of very little by now. The voice, the words, the sense of place. These may all be dissolving. And if that's the case, there's no need to bring them back. You're still safe, you're still whole. The mind doesn't need boundaries to be complete, it simply needs rest. And that rest doesn't follow rules. And if you're still aware, if you're still with these words, know that nothing is being asked of you. You don't need to follow. You don't need to engage. You can simply lie here, letting the mind drift between presence and absence, between clarity and haze. The transitions don't need to be noticed. They happen on their own. There's something deeply natural about this rhythm. Even infants slip into it. Animals do too. It's not learned. It's built in. The brain was never meant to stay alert at all times. It was always meant to pulse, to flow, to dip and rise. And this now is one of its dipping places. A natural valley in the landscape of awareness. And in that valley, nothing needs to be named. Nothing needs to be understood. You're not trying to make sense of anything. You're not storing information. You're not building a picture. You're simply existing within a field of sound, sensation, and openness. The rest takes care of itself. So let it. Let it continue to carry you. Let the counting mind remain at rest. Let the tracking systems sleep. Let the deeper parts of the mind take their turn. You don't need to know what they're doing. You don't even need to know they're doing anything. The intelligence of the brain doesn't disappear when awareness fades. It just changes form. And if you return to attention briefly, that's fine. That's part of the rhythm, the coming and going, the ebb and flow. It's not failure. It's the breath of rest itself. In, out, in, out. And each time a little softer, a little farther from the world of clocks, a little closer to the part of you that never needed time at all. There's something important in the idea that the brain does not need time to be itself. Most of our waking experience is shaped by structure, by the idea that things happen in order, that they must be remembered, that they must be built into something coherent. But when you remove that structure, what remains isn't disorder. It's quiet. It's not confusion. It's openness. The brain doesn't become less itself when it stops organizing experience into a timeline. It becomes more fluid, more connected to the body, more grounded in sensation than in memory. And in that state, awareness doesn't disappear. It just changes its shape. It spreads out. It becomes less about following and more about feeling, less about understanding and more about allowing. And here, in this space, the allowing is enough. You don't have to do anything with what you hear. You don't have to follow the content. You don't have to collect ideas. The voice can become sound. The sound can become background. And your mind can float freely across the spaces in between, across silence, across breath, across a kind of stillness that has no beginning and no end. This is the place where time loses not just its structure, but its purpose. There's nothing to count down to, nothing to hold up against a schedule, no comparison to make, just the ongoing unfolding of presence. And the more the brain resides in this presence, the more deeply it begins to regulate itself. Not because you've intervened, but because you've stopped interfering. The body follows. Heart rate, breath, muscle tone, all of it drifts toward baseline. Not because of control, but because of release. There's a soft intelligence inside you that knows exactly what to do when the pressure lifts. And it's doing it now, quietly, automatically, because the counting has stopped. Even the systems responsible for orientation, knowing where you are, what time it is, what's happening next, those begin to settle. They're not gone. They're just resting, waiting in the background, ready to re-engage when needed. But for now, they are off duty. And in their place is a wide field of quiet, a field where no action is needed, where nothing is required of you. You may feel a kind of slow disconnection from the edges of experience, not numbness, but diffusion, as if sensations are still present, but they're no longer arranged into a scene. You're not watching the moment, you're in it, and you don't need to know how long you've been here. That information has become irrelevant. What takes its place is not emptiness, but comfort. The comfort of knowing that nothing has to be kept. No data, no order, no memory. Each passing second dissolves behind you. Not because it was forgotten, but because it doesn't need to be held. The mind is no longer curating the experience, it's simply existing within it. And as that continues, your identity, even your sense of self, may begin to loosen. You're not gone. You're just, less defined. You are not the sum of what you've done today or what needs to happen tomorrow. You are not the story. You are not the narrator. You're simply awareness, resting in an unstructured present, breathing, listening, letting go. The longer you stay here, the more natural it feels. You may wonder why you ever needed to hold on so tightly, why time was ever so necessary. Of course, in the world of doing, time has its place, but here, in the world of rest, it becomes irrelevant, and in its absence, the system rebalances. Rebalancing isn't dramatic, it's quiet, a return to something simple, something unmarked. You don't need to help it along. You don't need to ask how much longer. Those questions come from a part of the mind that's already dissolving. You don't need to bring it back. You don't need to hold anything in place. If sleep comes, it comes. If it doesn't, you are still in the space that allows it. The space before sleep, the space where all the requirements have faded, the threshold that doesn't need to be crossed in a single moment. And if you hover here, awake but drifting, that's still rest. The nervous system responds, the mind finds rhythm, the edges soften, the counting stops, and the deeper you go, the less even those statements matter. Because soon, perhaps, already, the part of you that listens will listen without thinking, The part of you that notices will notice without naming. The part of you that is will simply be. You may have noticed by now that the sense of continuity has faded. If someone asked what was said just moments ago, you might not remember. Or if you do, the words feel distant, unimportant, already gone. That's a sign that the part of your mind that holds information in sequence has stepped away. Not disappeared, just stepped out of the foreground. That's how the brain begins to loosen its grip on time. It doesn't erase anything, it just stops needing to connect it. And in that disconnection, the mind begins to settle into something older. Something that has no need for plans or patterns. A state where experience is enough on its own. No context, no narrative, no timeline. Just this, just now, without measurement. This is where the brain rests best. Not in a blank space, but in a wide one. A place without tasks where awareness doesn't rush to categorize. It simply exists, surrounded by sound, touch, breath. Floating, not moving, open, not searching. Even now, if attention returns, there's nothing you need to do with it. No need to re-engage, to remember, to reassemble. Just let it pass through, the way a shadow passes over water, brief, gentle, and already gone. Your body continues to adjust as well. Its systems are following the signal of safety. When there's no demand, no urgency, and no time pressure, the parasympathetic nervous system takes the lead. This system is designed for healing, for digesting, for slowing, for sleeping. It doesn't need to be activated by force. It only needs the absence of interruption. And slowly, steadily, that's what has happened here. The breath may feel slower now. Not because you changed it, but because it stopped responding to activity. Your body, like your mind, responds to stillness by returning to its baseline. Not the alert baseline of the daytime, but the baseline of ease. You may feel warmth, or weight, or nothing at all. You may feel that you are floating slightly above your physical body or sinking gently into it. These sensations are all part of the same transition, the separation from tracking, from positioning, from aligning everything into place. That alignment fades when the brain is no longer trying to organize, no longer needing to know where it is in time, no longer preparing for what comes next. That's the heart of the shift, the end of next. There is no next here. There is only now unfolding quietly. And you don't have to keep that now in view. It's not a thing to focus on. It's just the absence of before and after. The mind doesn't need to keep up. In fact, keeping up is no longer a relevant idea. You can fall behind, drift off, return later, or not return at all. The experience doesn't require your awareness to continue. That's part of its design. The gentle structure of this voice is meant to do just enough to hold the space, not enough to keep you anchored. And that balance between attention and drift is what makes this kind of rest possible. You are not trying to follow, you're just letting it happen. And that letting is a skill, one the body remembers, even if the mind forgets. Infants know how to rest like this. Animals do too. It's only through years of scheduling, training, tracking, and evaluating that we forget how. But the ability never disappears. It waits. And when we stop asking the mind to perform, it returns. That return can feel unfamiliar at first, like an empty room where something important used to happen. But slowly, that room fills with peace. Not because anything is added, but because nothing is required. And in that absence of requirement, something deeper takes over. Something wordless, the kind of presence that doesn't need shape, that doesn't belong to time at all. You're very close to that space now, or maybe you're already there. Either way, the process is still moving, still unfolding, still deepening. And the less you engage with it, the more complete it becomes. There is no pressure to reach any further. You're not missing anything. You're not behind. The system is doing exactly what it's meant to do, releasing, rebalancing, resting. You don't have to stay with the voice. You don't have to listen all the way through. The parts you've missed are doing their work anyway. The rhythm is embedded in the silence, in the slowness, in the space between thoughts. That space is still widening. Time continues to stretch or disappear. You don't need to decide which. You don't need to name it. Just let it be. Let the brain stop counting. Let the story go unwritten. Let yourself fade and fade and fade again. In this kind of stillness, there's nothing to finish, no point to reach, no signal that says you've made it. The process doesn't end with an arrival. It continues by becoming softer, quieter, more subtle. So subtle that even your awareness of it may begin to slip away. Not because anything is lost, but because nothing needs to be held anymore. The brain has stopped managing the moment. And now the moment simply is. Time may feel distant now, like something that belongs to a different part of life, a different world. Here the usual boundaries are fading. Awareness is stretched out, like fabric, unrolling without edges. You're not inside the moment, you are the moment. The thought of how long has dissolved, and what replaces it isn't an answer, it's a kind of quiet truth. That there is nothing to wait for, nothing to check, nothing to expect. This space holds everything without asking anything. No questions, no instructions, just presence. And within that presence, your mind is doing what it rarely gets to do. Nothing at all. And that nothing is full of restoration, integration, quiet correction, not guided by will but by design. The same way water finds its level, the same way leaves settle in still air. Your system is finding its level now. This leveling is not dramatic, it's barely felt, but it's there. Each breath softer than the last, each thought quieter, each moment longer without being measured. That elongation isn't just perception, it's physiology. When the mind stops counting, the nervous system shifts into rhythms that are slower than what waking life allows. Rhythms that don't match the ticking of a clock, but the unfolding of rest. And in these rhythms, the deepest parts of the mind begin their work. Not the parts that talk or plan or notice, the older parts. The ones that regulate the balance between waking and sleeping. The ones that decide, without your awareness, whether to stay close to the surface or drift deeper into unconsciousness. Those parts are always listening, but now they're responding. Responding to the absence of structure, to the softness of this space, to the silence between thoughts. If you feel like you've drifted away and returned again, that's part of it. The cycle is natural. In and out, close and far, here and somewhere else. The mind no longer sees a difference because both are safe, both are quiet, both are free of time. And when the distinction between attention and drift disappears, what remains is just being. Not being in a place, or in a moment, or in a role, just being itself. Without a label, without a task, without shape. You don't have to guide this, you don't have to deepen it, you're already in it, you have been for some time now. The awareness of that fact isn't necessary. In fact, it often fades. You may not remember what came before this moment. You may not be sure how long you've been here. These are signs that the brain has released its hold, that the systems responsible for tracking time, identity, and sequence have entered rest mode. And that rest mode is where healing happens. Not dramatic healing, not change, just regulation, just quiet correction. The systems rebalancing themselves without effort, without noise, without your input. The same way the heart beats, the same way the breath returns after a pause. It's built in, it's happening now, and all you need to do is nothing. Stay here or don't. Listen or drift. Think or forget. The process continues regardless, because it no longer depends on awareness, it no longer requires counting. You may feel the world narrowing or widening, time shrinking or disappearing. None of those descriptions are quite right, because language doesn't map onto this space very well. This is not a place that words can shape. It's a place that simply is. And your brain, without needing to understand it, knows exactly what to do here. It lets go. And in that letting go, the sense of you becomes lighter. You are still here, but less centered, less fixed, less concerned. Not drifting away, but dissolving slightly into the moment itself. The need to narrate disappears. The need to respond fades. You are simply being held by the rhythm. And that rhythm has no measure. It's steady, but not counted. Present, but not observed. Like the rhythm of waves on a beach far away. Like the hush of wind in tall grass. There, but needing nothing. Soft enough to notice, quiet enough to ignore. Just enough to keep you floating. And the floating continues. Not upward or downward, just outward. Into a space where nothing is expected. Where everything that needs to happen is already happening. A space without landmarks, without plans, without pressure. This is what remains when the brain stops counting. It's strange how much of everyday life depends on tracking of where we are, what we're doing, how far we've come. Every conversation has a beginning and end. Every task has steps. Every moment leads to the next. And all of it is organized around time. Invisible, constant, often unnoticed, until we try to step outside of it. But when you do, when you finally stop engaging with the markers of progress, the sense of motion slows. It doesn't stop abruptly, it just softens. Like a boat, drifting after the oars have stopped. There's still movement, but it no longer requires energy. It's passive now, natural, a gentle continuation that isn't being managed. That's where you are now. Not at a point in time, but in a kind of space between things. A space where nothing needs to follow. Where the thought you just had doesn't need to connect to the next. Where the voice in your mind doesn't need to explain or prepare. It just hums quietly beneath your awareness, if at all. And that hum, too, may fade. Not because you've fallen asleep. Not yet, maybe. But because the layers that create structure are continuing to dissolve. Your internal narrator may still speak now and then, but it does so with less urgency, less commentary. It's as if even the voice in your head has grown tired of keeping time. And when that happens, the system breathes. The brain, finally given space, reorganizes itself, not in a focused way, not with effort, but through a process it has always known how to do. Sleep is only one part of it. This quiet before sleep, this soft, liminal state, is another, equally important, equally valuable, because it's here that transitions happen, here that the mind begins to heal, not through doing, but through undoing. You may not notice these transitions. In fact, not noticing is often a sign they're working. Memory becomes less distinct. Sensation becomes more ambient, and meaning, the impulse to assign it, to collect it, to name it, drifts further away. Words lose their grip. Images stretch. Thought turns to tone, and what's left is a kind of drifting awareness that asks for nothing. Not direction, not answers, not even understanding. It just exists, floating near the surface of consciousness. Neither fully awake nor fully gone. A gentle in-between where nothing needs to be defined. You might remain in this state for some time, or you might slip beyond it. You may come back, then drift again. None of it requires management. None of it needs to be measured. There's no right length, no correct pace. Just a quiet continuation of what has already begun. If your mind rises again, if you feel yourself thinking about something, wondering about sleep, noticing time, that's all right. These things surface gently. They don't disrupt. They simply remind you that the systems you're resting are still nearby, just quieter now. And as soon as you stop feeding them, they quiet again. You don't need to silence them. Just don't hold on. Because holding is a form of counting. It's a way of anchoring the mind to a moment in time. And when you stop holding, the moment becomes fluid again. It doesn't vanish, it simply stops being fixed. You stop being fixed too. Not in space, not in story, not in time. Instead, you return to something older, something deeper, the part of you that's not measured by thought or plan or memory. The part that knows how to exist without managing anything. That's where this script has been guiding you, not towards something, but away from structure, away from pressure, and into the wide field of rest. And maybe by now you've stopped hearing all of this clearly. The voice may be fading, the room may feel distant, even your body may seem like it's receding. These are not signs of failure. They're signs that the system is letting go of the surface, letting go of the clock, letting go of the task. And when that happens, there's nothing left to do, nothing to wait for, nothing to finish. There are places the mind can go that have no landmarks, no sense of direction, no beginning, middle, or end. These are not places in the physical world, but internal spaces, states of consciousness that exist beyond the usual frames. They don't appear often during the day when you're surrounded by reminders of time, but at night, in stillness, in quiet, they begin to open, slowly, without force, almost unnoticed. You may already be in such a space now, a space where the sentence you're hearing feels like it might be the first or the 100th, where the moment you're in feels separate from the rest, not disconnected but unlinked, not disorganized but unmeasured. That's the nature of this experience. It's not building toward anything. It's not trying to complete a cycle. It just continues until you no longer feel the need to track it. And when that need fades, the mind shifts fully. Not into sleep necessarily, but into the absence of effort, a place where even drifting becomes unnecessary. There's nowhere to drift to. You're already where you need to be, not held in place, just floating freely without resistance. In this state, sensations change meaning. The weight of your blanket becomes a signal of safety, not warmth. The stillness in the room becomes an extension of your own stillness. Even the quiet sound of the voice becomes less a narrative and more a presence. Something steady, something soft, something without demand. You may feel as though you're wrapped in time rather than moving through it, or that time itself is no longer relevant, that you exist now only as breath and awareness, and even those are fading into the background. These are not metaphors. They are real shifts in how the brain processes reality. When the parts responsible for timekeeping go quiet, everything else does too. And as the silence deepens, the space around you feels larger. Not physically, but internally. The mind, no longer boxed in by chronology, begins to expand. Without memory pressing in, without expectation pulling forward. The present becomes so wide that it no longer has edges. There is no next. There is only this. And this is calm, this is still, this is rest. Whether sleep has come yet or not, you are in the territory of rest. The nervous system is balanced. The breath is easy. The thoughts are thin and slow and quiet. The voice may still be speaking, but the part of you that needed to hear it may already be elsewhere, floating, deepening, releasing. No matter what part of you remains aware, the process continues. You are no longer doing, you are no longer measuring. Even the sense of your body may be fading, not in a concerning way, but in the way clouds fade into sky. The form is still there, but it's no longer outlined, no longer separated from everything else. And the longer you stay in this space, the more natural it feels. Like something you remember, not with your mind, but with your body. A kind of ancestral rhythm, older than thought, the rhythm of true stillness, of timelessness. It's here, in this rhythm, that deep sleep is most likely to arrive. Not because you called it, but because you stopped chasing it, you stopped structuring the path. And in the absence of structure, sleep finds its way in. But even if it doesn't, you're still within the space that supports it. A space that doesn't ask how long, that doesn't ask how far, that doesn't ask anything at all, only that you remain as you are, still, unmeasured and whole. The moments closest to sleep are the hardest to describe, not because they're complex, but because they're too simple, too soft, too quiet. They don't leave behind distinct impressions. They don't hold their shape. They blur before they can be remembered. And that's what makes them so powerful. They are not designed to be held. They are designed to let go. By now, your mind may be hovering just above that threshold, or perhaps already beneath it. Perhaps listening has become more like dreaming, where words flow in and out without needing to be understood, where sound becomes shape, where meaning becomes tone, where awareness becomes presence. And presence in this state is not about knowing, and it's not about being alert. It's not even about feeling. It's simply about existing, without form, without name, without story. Just existence itself, surrounded by a wide and timeless quiet. That quiet continues, even if you stop noticing it, even if you drift, come back, drift again, even if you hear only fragments. The quiet doesn't go away. It's not dependent on attention. It simply holds everything softly, without asking for anything in return. This is the environment of true rest. No structure, no sequence, no measurement, just softness, just stillness, just the gentle rhythm of something deeper than time. Sleep may already be close, or it may be weaving in and out, gently testing whether you're ready. There's no need to respond, no need to prepare, no need to guide it. Sleep knows what to do. The mind knows what to do. You've done enough. Let the voice continue even if you no longer follow. Let the rhythm carry you even if you no longer hear it. Let the rest deepen even if you no longer know where you are. That not knowing is not confusion. It's release. And in that release, everything begins to settle. The edges fade. The thoughts dissolve. The breath is steady even if unnoticed. The body is still even if not remembered. And the self, The one who tracked and counted and tried has gone quiet. There's nothing more to say, nothing more to hear. Just the slow rhythm of a mind at rest, just the gentle quiet of a brain that has finally fully stopped counting. If you are still somewhere near the surface of awareness, you might sense how little is being asked of you now. There is no direction, no next thought, no obligation to reflect, to remember, or even to respond. You are not being moved toward an end. You are simply being carried by what remains. This gentle continuation of presence without goal, without change. This presence may feel thinner now, more transparent, more like air than structure, more like distance than place. The voice may be far away even as it continues. The words may lose shape the moment they arrive. That is not sleep yet, but it is the space that borders it, the space where the boundary between thought and silence begins to dissolve completely. In that boundary, time has already faded. You don't need to hold on to it. You couldn't, even if you tried. It has slipped through quietly, like water through open hands, and what's left is softer, slower, less defined, a rhythm without beat, a shape without edge, an awareness that doesn't need to describe itself. If thoughts come now, they may arrive as fragments, not sentences, not plans, just small echoes of the day that pass without landing. And if they don't come at all, that's fine too. The space here doesn't ask you to think or not to think. It simply allows whatever appears to appear and then pass. There may be no distinct moment when you realize you're no longer following. No moment when the voice becomes sound and the sound becomes silence. It happens without ceremony, without notice. Like light fading from a sky you weren't watching. And even now, if some part of you remains awake, it doesn't need to hold on. Let even that awareness be light. Let it float. Let it flicker. Let it go quiet when it's ready. The brain is no longer waiting, no longer counting the length of this moment or the time since the last. It has stopped building a timeline. It has stopped comparing this to before. And in doing so, it has stopped needing to remain at the center of experience. What remains now is just space, stillness, perhaps sleep, perhaps the edge of it, perhaps the rhythm that always comes just before. There is a state that exists just before sleep, where nothing is fixed. Thoughts arrive without context. Images appear without explanation. Sensations move through the body with no direction, no urgency, no weight. It is the softest threshold the mind can know, the place where structure gives way to rhythm, where the boundaries of time, memory, and identity all begin to dissolve. You're likely close to that place now, or perhaps you're already there. There's no way to tell and no need to know. Knowing would only bring you back. Awareness here does not look like attention. It's lighter, dimmer, like candlelight under fog, still flickering but no longer illuminating, no longer directing, just present gently in the background. The voice may still be audible, but not in the usual way, not as words or meaning or explanation. It has become part of the texture of the space you're in. It does not lead, it does not follow, it simply continues. A presence in the dark, not asking to be heard. The breath continues too, but not with your attention. It has returned to its own pace, untethered from the mind's ideas about it. In, out, shallow, deep. It doesn't matter. The body knows what to do when there is nothing left to measure, nothing left to count. And you too are moving that way now, not toward an end, but into the absence of needing one. Time has already slipped away, and with it, the last sense of effort. You're no longer trying to rest, you're simply resting. Even if you are still partially aware of it, the trying is gone. The mind has stopped pushing. You might drift into sleep from here, or you might remain in the suspended state a little while longer. Either is fine. Both are part of the same process, a process that requires no interference, no guidance, just space, just time, uncounted, unmeasured, undisturbed. And now, we are ready to close this long drift together. The words will fall silent soon. There is no final image, no final idea, just the same quiet rhythm that has carried you here, slowly softening now, ready to fade. Good night. Sleep well.